Dr. Sheldon, who will speak on the subject, the basis of physical vigor. This time I present to you Dr. Herbert M. Sheldon.
I guess before we undertake to talk on physical vigor, we ought to have some idea of what we are talking about. What do we mean by physical vigor? I'm sure that most of you would say, well, we mean physical energy. And that's true. But what do we mean by physical energy? You mean the ability to function. We mean the ability to live. We mean the ability to carry on the processes of life. Not really in a sluggish, slothful, inefficient manner, but in a vigorous, vital way. We mean the possession of power in function, power in action, stamina also in our daily life. And this has as its basis the same basis that life as a whole has. I pointed out to you this afternoon that all life has certain basic needs without which we cannot live, without which we cannot grow, without which we cannot develop, without which we cannot maintain the normal repairs resulting from everyday wear and tear of the body, without which we cannot heal wounds or broken bones, without which we cannot reproduce ourselves. These normal needs of life are the elements of health, they are the elements of vigor, they are the elements of stamina, they are the elements upon which we must depend in order to live at all. This is the positive side of vigor. To supply our bodies with adequate quantities, adequate qualities, proper proportions of these essential and basic requirements of life, without excesses or deficiencies of any, is the basis of vigor. It is the basis of health. It is the basis of resistance. It is the basis of everything that is worthwhile in living. Without them, we weaken, we sicken, we die. Even the absence of such a thing as iron in our bodies would result in speedy death. Now, we have about enough iron in the human body of a man of 150 pounds that if we could extract it all, to make about 2 carpet tacks. That isn't much iron. And yet, if that iron were completely absent, it would be impossible for us to take up oxygen and carry it to the cells of our body, so we'd smother to death as a lack of oxygen, from a lack of oxygen, in a very few seconds. This gives you some importance, I think, some idea of the vital importance of an adequate supply of all the essential needs of life. This supply is essential not merely to life itself on a low negative plane, but it is essential to life on any high positive plane. So that in our eating, in our drinking, in our breathing, in our sleeping, in our working, in our exercising, and all, we need to supply the body with adequate quantities and qualities of each of these, to the end that we may have that vital vigor. Now, most of us are eating, most of us are drinking, most of us are sleeping a little bit, most of us do what we have to do in some ineffective and inefficient way to meet the needs of life. It is impossible for man to escape completely from the normal elements of nature's system of hygiene without dying quickly. So that all through the ages, even though man has abandoned the primitive way of life, although he has abandoned the normal sources of supply and has learned to depend upon altered and artificial efforts maintain life, he has not been able to completely divorce himself from the normal, natural sources of existence. And if he ever does do so, he'll, as I said, die. There's another side to this vigor question, and that is the negative side. I'm going to begin this by reciting a little personal experience that I had when I was a high school boy. My father would not permit me to go out in the evenings and go to shows and so forth during the week. He required that I remain at home in the evenings and get my homework. So I studied sometimes far into the night. I'd stay up sometimes as late as 2 o'clock in the morning studying. I was young and I was vigorous, and in spite of the fact that sometimes I studied very late, I would wake up at the same time the following morning that I would if I went to bed early. I would get up at the same time, and I would bounce out of that bed with vigor, ready for activity, ready for my day's work or my day's activities. On Saturdays, however, I was permitted to go to the show. And there was a group of us boys who would walk to town on Saturday nights. I lived in a small town. We had about a mile walk into the city. We'd walk into town and we'd stop in what we used to know as an ice cream parlor. Some of you older people will remember the ice cream parlors. You younger ones will have to dream about what they were. But we'd stop there and we'd have some soft drinks. I got into the habit of taking Coca-Cola. And I'd usually have 2 glasses of Coca-Cola before going to the show, and then we'd come back and stop at the ice cream parlor on the way back, and I'd commonly have 2 more glasses of Coca-Cola before going home. Then I'd go home and I'd go to bed, and the next morning, instead of bouncing out of bed at the usual time, full of pep and energy, I couldn't wake up. I couldn't get my eyes open. I was languid. I was depressed. I was weak. I was sleepy. And I would stay in bed sometimes till 10 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd crawl languidly out, dress, and I'd get out and do a little running or baseball playing or something of the kind and work up a little circulation, and I'd begin to feel better. This went along for some time, and I began to wonder why. Why is it that on Sunday morning I feel this way? Why can't I get out of bed on Sunday mornings with the same pep, the same energy, the same enthusiasm, and the same desire to be active that I do on other mornings in the week? I knew that I hadn't been out any later on Saturday night than I often stayed up for study. I knew that I hadn't done anything unusual, except see a show, except that one thing, drink Coca-Cola. So after I analyzed what I was doing through the week, and what I was doing on Saturday, the only thing I could put my finger on as a possible cause of that Sunday morning languor, and that Sunday morning inability to get out of bed, was Coca-Cola. So I said, I'll stop drinking this stuff, and I'll see what effect it has. So the following Saturday, I didn't drink Coca-Cola. Sunday morning, I bounced out of bed at the usual time, with the usual vigor. That was not the languor, that was not the weakness, that was not the sleepiness, that was not the inability to get up. So I ran along that way for some time with the same result. Got up early in the morning with full of energy. Then the thought occurred to me that perhaps it wasn't the Coca-Cola after all. Maybe it was something else. So the next Saturday I took the usual amount of Coca-Cola, with the result that Sunday morning I had the same experience. I couldn't get out of bed. I tried it for 2 Saturdays, I believe, with the same result, and then I gave up all soft drinks from then until now. I have never taken another soft drink of any kind from that day to this. Now, the point I want to bring home to you in this story is the weakening, the depressing, the de-invigorating influence of toxic material. What is Coca-Cola? It's chiefly water. But in that water we have a liberal dose of phosphoric acid. Now phosphoric acid is of such strength that it'll melt or dissolve marble if you put it into it. We have a so-called therapeutic dose of caffeine. We have a liberal supply of white sugar. It's carbonated water at that, which is not good for us itself. It is colored with coal tar dyes, and flavored with artificial flavors. And this is the kind of substance that we take when we take Coca-Cola. Now, other soft drinks contain carbonated water. They contain either phosphoric acid or some other acid of a character that can't be utilized by the body. They contain either acetanilid or aspirin, not aspirin, or caffeine or some other toxin of that kind. And they contain the artificial flavors and the artificial coloring and the white sugar, just as does the Coca-Cola. So that it does not matter which one of them we take, we're taking a substance into our body that is depriving us of our energy. It is lowering our ability to live. It is lessening our ability to function. That means that it is depriving us of vigor. We are a nation of soft drink addicts. And as I pointed out to you this evening, we start rather young. I have seen mothers give their babies in their laps a bottle of Coca-Cola with a nipple on it and let them suck that Coca-Cola from the bottle just like they would milk from a nursing bottle. I've seen it. And I've seen it more than once. And I've heard others in other parts of the country say they had seen the same thing, so it must be more general than I know about. We begin this poisoning of ourselves at a rather early age. Now, this soft drink habit is not the only one that we have. We start early with tea and coffee. We start early with tobacco. We start early with other poisons. And they all rob us of vigor. They are all poison. Now, what is a poison? First, let us define a food. A food is any substance that can be transformed into living structure. This means that the body can take it and digest it and absorb it and carry it to the cells, and the cells can take it up and incorporate it into themselves as part of their structure, so that it becomes a part of the living body. It becomes muscle and bone and nerve and gland tissue. Anything that can be converted into living structure or transformed into living structure is food. Now, any substance that cannot be transformed into living structure, any substance that cannot be made into muscle and gland and nerve and brain tissue is a poison. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be just common ordinary chalk. It can be table salt. It can be prussic acid. It is a poison. The range of toxicity is all the way from almost nil at the bottom of the scale to a toxicity at the top of the scale that will kill almost like a stroke of lightning. Between these two extremes, all of these various substances that cannot be transformed into living structure exist at their various ranges of toxicity. If you take a substance into your body that cannot be transformed into living structure, it must be eliminated. It must be expelled. It must be extruded in some way or other. And this is done at great expense to the body, at great expense, in most cases, to its energy, at great expense to some of its substances and structures in other cases. When you take these things, you undergo a fight, a battle. You take the Coca-Cola, the pause that refreshes, and it is a so-called stimulant. Now, stimulation is nothing in the world except irritation. It is excitement. And it is the excitement and stimulation of resistance. You're very excited. If somebody cries fire at midnight and you jump out of bed and hurriedly throw your trunk out the window and jump out after it, that is a state of excitement. The same kind of excitement with the same kind of expenditure goes on internally when you take poison. You've got to expel it. It means lessening your energy. It means at the same time devoting energies that ought to be used in function to the work of resistance and expulsion. Now, let me give you just a simple illustration of what I mean there. You have a patient here who has eaten a meal, and he is in good condition, and he is digesting his food. The work of digestion is going along nicely, and you give him a so-called emetic. It doesn't matter which drug you use as an emetic that is of that type. You give him a so-called emetic, and in a short time after you give it to him, he starts vomiting. Now, the work of vomiting is to expel the poison, the emetic. But when you begin to vomit, you also suspend the process of digestion. So long as we are compelled to expend our energies in resisting and expelling these substances, we cannot use those energies in carrying on the functions of life. And this is just one of the evils of taking poisons of any kind for any purpose whatsoever. The point I want to bring home to you, however, is that the resistance and the expulsion, the excitement, the irritation means a waste, a dissipation of energy. Now, we have many ways of dissipating our energy, besides our poison habits, of which we have too many. But let's think of the poison habits for just a minute. Our forefathers, as I pointed out to you a long time ago, didn't have any poison habits. Our poison habits were introduced to us by physicians. Alcohol was originally used as a cure for disease. Morphine was originally used as a cure for disease. People didn't get the morphine habit in the past, except they were made into morphine addicts by physicians. Nowadays, pushers are getting young people to develop the morphine habit without going through the old route. But salt was originally used by the physicians to treat disease, and we began to use it to our food, add it to our food later. Pepper and salt and spices of all kinds were originally used as so-called medicines. At the time that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in his effort to find a water route to India, one of the chief articles of commerce that was brought over to Europe from India was spices. Now, these spices were not used in foods at that time. As a matter of fact, they cost so much, $50 to $60 to $75 an ounce. Now, how many people in Europe at that time could afford to pay such prices for spices to add them to their foods? They were too expensive even for the poor to use as medicines. But that's what they were used for. They were used as so-called medicines. Now, later they were removed from the medicine cabinet into the kitchen, put into the pantry, and we began to add them to our foods. All of our poison habits have come to us in just that way. They were first used as so-called medicines, and from medicines they became habitually used. But each part of the world was originally confined to one or two poisons that grew in its own vicinity. The American Indian, for example, here in this part of the world, used tobacco. Out in the West, peyote was used. Down in South America, chocolate and cocoa, all the same. They used that. They had poisons that grew in their own locality. In Arabia, the people used coffee. In India and China, they used tea. In China, they chew the beetle, the leaves of the beetle. In various parts of the world, they use various types of poisons, but they didn't have a collection of them as we have. We import them from all parts of the world. We get whiskey from Ireland, ale from the English, beer from the Germans, wine from the Italians, coffee from the Arabs, tea from India and China. We just bring them in, and we got tobacco from the Indians. We bring them in from all parts of the world, and then we manufacture some in the form of soft drinks for ourselves. So we have all the bad habits, poison habits of all the rest of the world, and we start early and we keep it up. Now, these are just some of the means by which we deprive ourselves of our normal supply of energy. These are some of the means by which we reduce our vigor, our functioning capacity, our ability to live. We waste our energies by our excesses. Now, by excess in this particular, I do not mean excessive use of tobacco, or excessive use of alcohol, or excessive use of coffee, or excessive use of tea, and so on. That is not a proper use of the term excess. Excess means overusing or overindulgence in those things that are useful. You can overeat. You can drink too much water. You can take too much sunshine. You can overwork. You can go to excesses in these normal activities of life. But you can't say that one murder a year is inside the realm of moderation. That if you go to kill 2 men a year, that's excess. Or that in arson, if you burn down one house, that's not excess, but if you burn down 2, that's excess. Or if you're a horse thief, if you steal 2 horses a year, that's moderation, but if you steal 3, that's excess. This is the wrong use of the terms moderation and excess. Moderation and excess are properly applied to those things that have a normal relation to life. And it is not proper, they are not properly applied to those things that have no normal relation to life. So when I say excess, I mean overeating, overworking, sexual excesses, oversunning, overbathing, staying too long in the water, taking baths that are too cold or too hot. This is the kind of things that I mean when I say excess, and by these excesses we rob ourselves of our energy. So moderation is one of the foundations of vigor. Immoderation or excess is a sure road to invalidism, to weakness, to disease, to premature death. Then we rob ourselves of our energies by our emotions. Emotions can waste energy almost as rapidly as the alcohol habit. As a matter of fact, fear can so waste your emotions, can so rapidly expend your energies that it can produce sudden death. Shock can do the same thing. Emotional shock. Worry, which is a baby fear, robs us of our energy. Grief can bring us almost to the grave within a few days. These emotions are wasteful of energy, and so we need to cultivate, as a means of conserving energy, emotional poise. I saw once this incident. At my hometown, I was downtown one evening about dusk, and I saw a group of people gathered on the courthouse square, right next to the courthouse lawn. And somebody was talking. And my curiosity led me to go over and see what was going on. And just as I arrived at the place, I saw one man strike the speaker and knock him down. The man had a Bible in his hand, and as he went down, he sat on the curb that went around the courthouse lawn. With a smile on his face and glory, hallelujah, on his lips, he rose up and started on with his preaching. As he did so, the young man struck him a second time, and down he went into the same sitting position, and again, with a smile on his cheeks, face, a glory, hallelujah, on his lips, he came up, still preaching. 2 men grabbed the young fellow and pulled him away, and the man went on preaching. Well, I asked one of the men on the outside of the crowd, what happened here? He said, well, that preacher there, who nobody knows, he came into town here, and he's preaching here on the street. He made the remark or the statement that every pastor of every church in this town is a hypocrite. And I said, well, what was wrong with that? And the man said, well, nothing perhaps, but the father of that young man is the pastor of the biggest church in the city, and he resented it. All right, the point of the story is that this particular preacher had cultivated emotional poise. There was no sign of fear in this man when he was knocked down either time. There was no sign of anger or of resentment. There was just a smile, and he got right up and went on with his preaching just as though nothing had happened. The man did not even disturb his sentence. He went right on with the sentence and completed it. There was poise. There was the kind of poise that conserves energy. Now, I think that all of us are capable of cultivating just that kind of poise. I think that we're capable of cultivating such a high degree of emotional poise, of equilibrium, that we too can conserve our energies and stop dissipating them or wasting them by our emotional activity. Dr. Wager, who had a health school in Redlands, California some years ago, in a very fine work entitled The Genesis and Control of Disease, makes this statement: we are either poised or poisoned. Now, that is a literal truth, because a lack of poise means a waste of energy. It means a production of enervation, and enervation invariably checks excretion or elimination. And when excretion is checked, there is a gradual accumulation in the body of the normal wastes of life, producing a condition that we call toxemia, or a state of poisoning, in other words. Poised or poisoned is literally true. And how does it poison us? By reducing our energy. So, the cultivation of poise is just as important in the emotional life of man as the cultivation of moderation in supplying his body with its normal needs, or in abstaining from those things that we have ignorantly introduced into our modes of life, such as our poison habits. When we become enervated and don't feel good, when we have sluggish bowel action, when we have indigestion, when we get up in the morning with a dark brown taste in the mouth, with pasty teeth, with a coated tongue, with a foul breath, with a frontal headache, with a sharp pain here and there, little symptoms that we don't think amount to anything, and we ignore them, or perhaps palliate them with a cigarette or a cup of coffee or a drink of whiskey or a drug of some kind that we get at the drugstore. We palliate them with these things and go on until we begin to get a little more worse suffering and a little worse suffering, and then we go to somebody for treatment. And what do they give us? We go to one group and they give us more poison. We're already suffering perhaps from an excessive intake or from a rather large intake and a long continued intake of poison. We're already suffering from emotional imbalance. We're already suffering from immoderation in supplying the body with its normal needs. We're weak. We're poisoned. We need rest. We need purification. We need invigoration and purification. So they give us poison, which only adds to our trouble. The body has to relieve itself of these two. It has to resist them and expel them at a further cost to itself. We go to another group and they put us on the table face down and they hang our eyebrows on one end and our toenails on the other, and they jump on our backs. Now that is not true today. That when I studied chiropractic in Chicago more than 30 years ago, that was the joke we had there in the chiropractic college. That we hung their eyebrows on the edge of one chair and their toenails on the other, and then we jumped on the back. Now those of you who are old enough to remember the chiropractic of those days and who had chiropractic adjustments may remember that even if you didn't have them yourself, you heard others. You heard them when they got an adjustment. You could hear them 2 or 3 blocks down the street yelling, and they couldn't sleep all night because the chiropractors in those days made an honest effort to make an adjustment. And boy, they sometimes went, you thought they were breaking your spine. Nowadays they give you what they call painless adjustment, which is merely kidding you. But at any rate, every thrust of the spine, even if it's a so-called painless one, constitutes a mechanical stimulus applied to a nerve center. And it makes you feel good because it stimulates you. It's just like taking a cup of coffee or toddy and feeling better. You're mechanically stimulated instead of chemically stimulated, but you're stimulated. And every stimulant means a waste of energy. Or you go to an osteopath, and he puts you on a table, and he mauls you, and he twists you, and he pulls your leg, and he carries on. Well, all of this represents mechanical stimulation. Or you go to a physiotherapist, and he bakes you, and he freezes you, and he boils you, and he fries you. And all of this represents thermal stimulation. Or he electrocutes you, and that represents electrical stimulation. You need rest, and they give you means and measures of treatment that further innervate you, that further reduce your energy. What you need is rest. Well, you can go to many places and get a rest. That is, they put you to bed and they tell you you're going to rest, but they call you in for massages. So they maul you and they pound you and they knead you and they make you like making up dough. And this is stimulating. They give you drugs. I remember a place that used to be not far from my place there in San Antonio. It is now torn down. It belonged to the Woodmen of the World. It was a place where they cared for tubercular cases. If you belonged to the Woodmen of the World and you developed tuberculosis, it didn't matter where you were, you could go there and be cared for without cost. And it was, the people would go there and they would put them to bed. And I visited the place many times because the dentist and some of the physicians there were friends of mine. And I'd visit there, and I got an ample opportunity to observe what was going on. These patients would be put to bed, and they'd be fed 3 square meals a day, they would be fed like harvest hands. They were doing nothing, and they were being fed like harvest hands. And besides that, they were being fed between meals. And they were allowed to smoke, and they were given drugs, and they were given soft drinks at intervals during the day. They weren't resting. How do you expect to rest when you're eating so heavily? It is estimated that it requires as much energy to digest and to handle in all the ways that the body has to handle 3 square meals a day as it does to do 8 hours of hard physical labor. Now, rest, they were working hard. The time to see how much energy is required in digesting food is when you come off of a fast. You're feeling all right, you've got a certain amount of energy, you've got a certain amount of pep, and you start eating. And immediately you feel tired and weak. And it takes you several days of eating to get to the point where you don't feel that. Energy is required to handle all that great mass, and most of it foodless stuff. They gave them white bread and white sugar, and they gave them canned foods, and they gave them, if they gave them potatoes, it was mashed potatoes. They never thought about giving them a baked potato or a steamed potato in the jackets. And they gave them tea and coffee, and nobody ever got well. In the years I watched the patients in that institution, not a single tubercular patient ever recovered health. Some of them went home, and some of them died, but none of them ever recovered health. They'd go along for a little while, and they'd say, well, now you're getting better. They'd make their tests and they'd x-ray them. You're getting better. Soon we're going to let you out of bed now, and soon we'll let you get her up and walk around, and before you knew it, that soon didn't come. They were collapsing their lungs, or they're opening the lungs and opening the chest and operating on the lungs. They were doing this, that, and the other, but the patients were not getting well. Well, that wasn't resting. Those patients needed rest, but they kept them in bed for long periods of time, sometimes for 2 and 3 and 4 years. Now, rest reaches a point after a while when it becomes rust. There comes a time after a while when you've got to get active again, even if you do have tuberculosis. Exercise is one of the essentials of normal life. It's one of the essentials of vigor. And to put a person to bed and just let him lay there until he rusts out and dies of rust is a ridiculous thing. At the same time he's doing nothing, you're feeding him, stuffing him as though you were trying to fatten him for the market. Hog killing time is soon due, and we want this fellow to be good and fat. We want to make plenty of lard from him. No wonder they don't get well. Now, with this kind of life, stimulant habits, excesses, emotional overirritation, treatments that are more deadly than the mode of life itself, how do we ever expect to have normal vigor? How do we ever expect to have good health? How do we ever expect to live a normal lifespan? It's just not possible. It's not in the cards. So we don't. How are we then to restore vigor once we have lost it? Well, we come home in the evening after a hard day's work, and we're very tired. What do? We go to the table and we have a good meal, and we go out and we work all night. We come in the morning, we're tired, we have another good meal, and we go out and we work all day, and we just keep on working if we just keep on eating. Is that the way we do it? We're told that we get our energy from our food. So we just keep eating and eating and eating and working and working and working, and we never get tired because we keep replenishing our energy by eating more food. Is that the way we do it? No, it's not. We go to bed and we go to sleep, and even if we don't eat, we wake up the next morning replenished and refurbished and ready for a day of activity. Sleep, rest, and sleep are old Mother Nature's grand representative, restorative, and recuperative processes. Rest and sleep are the means by which we restore energy. These are the conditions that are required for the restoration of energy. But of course, we've got to stop the expenditure on the one hand. We've got to stop all nerve leaks and then get our rest and sleep. Stimulants don't give us strength. They force us to expend the strength we already have. They leave us weaker, not stronger. And that's the reason we keep returning to them. We take a stimulant, we feel good, we're peppy, we're energetic, and then the stimulant wears off, as we say. It means we've eliminated it, and we feel weak. We feel languid. We feel like I did when I took the Coca-Cola. So how do we remedy a condition like that? We take another stimulant. And now we feel good again. And as soon as that wears off, we feel the same way, so we take another stimulant. So the essence of addiction is the misery that is caused by the prior use of a drug. We take the stimulant to give us again that feeling of strength that the drug has robbed us of. Is it a narcotic we take? Well, take a morphine addict. You take him off his morphine, and he has what they call withdrawal symptoms. Now, he can have this withdrawal symptoms any time of the day or night or any time of the week or month that he stops, because the symptoms are with him all the time. He simply smothers his miseries, his discomforts, his unease, his pains by re-narcotizing his nerves with another dose of the same thing that has caused his misery to start with. There's nothing unusual or new in his withdrawal symptoms. He could have had them last year if he'd have stopped taking his drug even for 1 or 2 doses. But give him a dose of morphine, re-narcotize his nerves, and he's comfortable. He's happy. He's apparently normal. So again, we take the drug to cover the unease, the feeling of weakness, or the feeling of pain and discomfort that were caused by the prior use of the same drug. We're trying to do it the homeopathic way. Like cures like. We need rest, not stimulants. We need rest, not narcotics. I understand that in Russia now they're using what they call the sleep cure. They're giving people drugs to make them unconscious. We do the same thing in this country. We give them drugs to make them unconscious. If you can't sleep, take a sleeping pill. Now, nobody ever goes to sleep when they take a sleeping pill. They become unconscious. They're in a stupor. They're not asleep. Sleep is a physiological condition. This is a pathological one. This is a state of poisoning. You wake up in the morning, and so to say, you regain consciousness. You come out of the stupor, or nearly out. You're half stupefied. You're languid. You're irritable. You're grouchy. You're tired. You're weak. You need some sleep. You need sleep more now than you did before you took the sleeping pill. That is not what I mean when I say rest and sleep are nature's grand representative, restorative, and recuperative and reparative process. I mean rest and sleep in the normal sense. If you can't sleep, you can at least rest. Many times I've found that I was too excited. After a lecture, for example, last night rather, I didn't get to sleep until rather late at night. After a lecture of that kind, you find yourself to be excited, and you just don't fall asleep right away. But I find that if I just relax and lie quiet and not worry about not sleeping, the next morning I'm refreshed and invigorated anyhow. But if we roll and toss and tumble and get up and read and walk the floor and drink milk or eat an apple or an onion or some of the other things that are said to cause us to go to sleep, or if we count sheep or do any of those other silly things or stuff our ears with cotton, the next morning we wake up, we get up, we're still tired, we're not refreshed, we're languid, and we are still in need of sleep. If we learn to relax. Now, it's estimated that in a state of thorough relaxation in sleep, about 6 nerve impulses a minute reach the muscle. In a state of tension in sleep, about 30 nerve impulses a minute reach the same muscles. This shows how much importance we should attach to relaxation. We should learn to relax. We should practice relaxing. We should cultivate the art of relaxation. That is one of the things that we need in order to conserve our energies. Relax, relax, relax. A number of years ago, the British Army in India was having a lot of sickness, minor sickness, among the soldiers. They were being marked quarters, and they were not on duty because of illness. There was so much of it that an investigation was made. And it was decided that a few simple changes in the way of handling those soldiers might remedy the situation. They were taking these soldiers out on these long marches in India. It's quite hot. They give them a long march, bring them back in, send them right into the mess hall, tired, fatigued. Send them into the mess hall and feed them a heavy meal. They stopped that. They'd bring them in off the marches. They'd send them to their bunks. for rest and relaxation. And after a period of rest and relaxation, then they sent them into the mess hall and let them eat. With that simple process, that one simple change in the way of feeding those soldiers, they reduced the illness in that British Army by 50%. Now why? Because when we are fatigued, we do not have digestive power. To eat a big meal under such conditions is to eat it and to guarantee indigestion. To relax and rest and to recuperate so that you've got digestive power means that you'll digest your food. So, by that simple change, they reduced the illness in that army by 50%. What do? Are you eating while you're tired and fatigued? Do you rest first? Do you relax and recuperate some and then eat? You should. You'll have better digestion if you do. We have as our golden rule in hygiene, if you're not comfortable in mind and body from one meal to the next, miss the meal. You can miss 2 meals or 3 or more if that much is required in order for the restoration of physical comfort or mental poise. Be poised. Be mentally comfortable or be physically comfortable before you eat. And if the discomfort comes between meals and it passes off before the next meal time comes around, miss the meal anyhow. Why? Well, let's see. You have here a patient. She is enjoying her meals. She is digesting them well. Everything is going along lovely, and then Sunday comes. Now, there's nothing wrong with Sunday. It's just a nice, pleasant day to rest in. That was its original intent, as a day of rest. We've converted it into a day of something else, but nonetheless, the patient is resting. Sunday comes. She expects a visitor from home. The visitor doesn't come. It's to be there at about 1 o'clock. All right, she has her Sunday meal at noontime. 1 o'clock comes and nobody arrives. She begins to get a little anxious. 1:30, still nobody. 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, she gets more and more anxious and worried. By 4 o'clock, she's suffering with pain. Gas pains, she calls them. No, they're not gas pains. She may have a little gas, but not enough to cause pain. Muscular spasms due to emotional disturbances of the sympathetic nervous system. Tomorrow morning, this is noon on Sunday. Monday morning, you can give that woman a lavage. That is, wash out her stomach. You can bring out the undigested meal of Sunday noon. Now, if she should calm down, and if that pain should cease, or that discomfort should cease by, let us say, 4:30 or 5 o'clock, it would still not be wise to eat that evening meal. If you're not comfortable from one meal to the next, miss the meal. And that goes for physical comfort as well. Now, let me tell you of another thing that happened. 2 dogs were fed a meal of flesh. Each of them was given the same size meal. One of them was chained to a tree and left at home. The other dog was chained to the rear axle of a buggy and forced to trot at a rapid pace for about 4 hours, going around in a circle and arriving back at the starting point at the end of that time. After this 4-hour period, the meals were recovered from the stomachs of the 2 dogs. The dog that had been resting at home under the tree had almost completely digested his food. The dog that had been forced to trot for 4 hours behind that buggy had hardly started to digest his meal. Now, we feel that we can't work through the morning unless we have a big breakfast. And we can't work through the afternoon unless we have a big noon meal. Actually, we don't digest our breakfast because work stops the process of digestion. We don't digest our noon meal because work stops the process of digestion. If we have to have food to work on, we can't work on what we eat at breakfast because it's got to be first be digested, then it has to be absorbed, it has to be carried by the bloodstream to the cells, it has to be incorporated into those cells as part of themselves before it can be used in work. And this takes more than 4 hours' time. So what you eat for breakfast cannot possibly contribute to the work you do in the morning. What you eat at noon cannot possibly contribute to the work you do in the afternoon. You're working this morning and this afternoon too on the food you ate yesterday. And only on that part of the food that you ate yesterday that you digested. The food that you didn't digest isn't doing you any good at all. So, to guarantee that you have good digestion, which spells good nutrition, it is essential that you eat under such conditions and in such a way that you guarantee no hindrances to the work of digestion. This is important in the preservation of vigor or in its restoration. Proper eating. Not just proper food, that's very vitally important, but eating under proper conditions. Physical conditions, emotional conditions, and other conditions that guarantee the least hindrance to the work of digestion. This is also one of the reasons that proper combinations of foods are so important. We eat the most haphazard combinations of any people in all history. We mix together more foods at one meal than any people in all history. And we also spend more millions of dollars a year for Alka-Seltzer, Bellans, Tums, and things of that kind than any other people in all history. They're making millions out of us because of our indigestion, when all we need to do is make a few simple changes in our mode of life and in our mode of eating to avoid indigestion. We can save not only what we pay on the drugs, but we can save also on food supplies and on other costs. And we can be better nourished, and we can have greater vigor. It is, in my opinion, high time that the American people begin to do a little thinking for themselves. We have been letting somebody else do our thinking. And do you know what they do for you? What they do when they think for you? They don't think for you, they think for themselves. How much can I get out of this poor sucker? How much has he got? You call in a physician today, and the first question he asks you, have you got insurance? Yes, I've got insurance. How much does it pay? You tell him how much it pays. Okay, you've got to go to the hospital. You get to the hospital, so they start giving you a lot of fancy examinations. They give you x-rays and blood tests and various other tests. Not that you need them, not that they're any good, but you get them because they run the bill up. You get an operation that you don't need because that also runs the bill up. You get drugs that they know are not going to do you any good, but that runs the bill up. They have figured out that the insurance company will pay $500 on your case, and they've got to run it up to $700 because you've got to pay something too. It has become so bad that certain of the insurance companies in Boston and elsewhere are right now operating their own places to care for their insured people, and they're not letting the physicians handle it. They've rented hotels, and they're putting their insured people into the hotels, and they've got their staff of nurses in there handling their patients. I was there only a few days ago, and I learned it for the first time. I didn't know it was going on. I knew that sooner or later the insurance companies were either going to have to stop writing health insurance or sickness insurance or hospitalization insurance, or else they were going to have to do something to protect themselves, because they've made this thing into a racket, just like they've made cancer into a racket. Cancer is one of the biggest rackets in the world today. Probably 85% of the diagnoses of cancer are not cancer. 15% is probably cancer. The other 85% is lumps of one kind or another that wouldn't become cancer if they were left there for 100 years. Quite a racket. They're doing the thinking. You're just saying, well, my doctor knows. He's been to college. He's an authority. Bernard Shaw once said that you pay a man $2 to trim your corn, and you pay him $1,000 to cut off your leg. So he cuts off your leg. Why bother with trimming the corn? These things are funny in a way, yes, and I don't blame you for laughing, but they're serious, they're tragic. And they go on because we refuse to think for ourselves. We need to do a little thinking for ourselves. We need to cultivate a little responsibility, personal responsibility. We need to accept the fact that we are responsible beings, that we build our own diseases, that we are the architects of our own misery. No, we like to pass the buck and say, God sent this disease upon me. The devil invaded me. The stars got in the way. A germ crawled in under my toenail. A virus got in through my tonsils while my guard was down or something. And these viruses and these germs, they hide around in dark places where you can't see them, and as you pass by and your guard is down, they jump on you out of the dark, and they crawl in you. You are in no wise responsible for the fact that you are not a healthy individual. And, of course, you're not responsible for your recovery. Here's a serum, here's a vaccine, here's a pill, here's a shot in the arm. We'll take out your tonsils, we'll pull your teeth, we'll remove your gallbladder. Well, we'll just take you apart piece by piece and consign you to the garbage pail, and that'll restore you to health. And you never stop to think, what are they doing to me? What's wrong with my organs that they have to be taken out? Haven't they any function? Don't they have a purpose? Why are they there if they need to be removed? Now, if it's logical to remove a man's tonsils because he's got inflammation of the tonsils, why don't we remove his heart when he has inflammation of the heart? It's true enough that if you chop off a man's toe to cure corn, he'll never have another corn, not on that toe at least. And if you cut off his head to remove a headache, he'll never again have a headache. But this is not the way to restore people to health. We restore them to health. We restore their vigor. We restore their energy by simple natural processes upon which the health and the energy originally depended. You don't build tissue by anything except by the same means and the same processes with which they were originally built. You grew from a fertilized ovum, which was so small you had to have a microscope to see it, to a full-grown adult man by certain processes, certain histogenic processes that brought you up and produced your heart and your liver and your lungs and your bones and your kidneys and your brain and all parts about you, your skin, your eyes, and so on and so forth, and brought you up to adulthood by those processes. And it is by these same processes and the same materials that those processes used in building you up from ovum to manhood or ovum to womanhood, with which we still build tissue. And there isn't anything else to do it with. And it is these same processes of life that are the ones that are responsible for our production of energy. If we waste our energies, they are the things that restore them. Not something outside of ourselves that somebody can do to us or do for us, or something that we can do for ourselves. Must do for ourselves. Nobody else can rest for you. Nobody else can sleep for you. Nobody else can cease smoking for you. Nobody else can relax for you. Nobody else can exercise for you. Nobody can eat for you. Nobody can do anything. You must do it yourself. That is the reason you are the responsible being. That is the reason you must learn to shoulder your own responsibility and stop trying to put the responsibility somewhere else. It belongs to you. It behooves you then to do a little thinking, to acquire a little knowledge, to be able to guide yourself and not depend on somebody else who's going to think in a way to bring your shekels out of your pocket into his. I remember a number of years ago I was with this New York Evening Graphic. I had a daily column in the Graphic, and I had in the Saturday edition, we didn't have a Sunday edition. We had the magazine section and the rotogravure section on Saturdays. And I used to have a full page and sometimes two-page spreads in the Saturday edition dealing with health. This condition went on for some time. There came a so-called epidemic in Peekskill, New York. It was supposed to be an epidemic of smallpox. Now, what did they have? They had an epidemic. They had one case of what they called smallpox. Just one case. With one case of alleged smallpox, they started an epidemic. Everybody had to be vaccinated. All the school children had to be vaccinated. Even if they had been vaccinated before, they had to be revaccinated. There was a citizens' military training camp just outside the city that year, and all the soldiers, all the boys in the military training camp at least, had to be vaccinated, else they would have to be confined to camp and they couldn't go into town. So they got them all started vaccinating. A child died from vaccination. Well, the child developed tetanus. They gave the cause of death as tetanus. They said that the child had been playing in the garden, and it had gotten garden soil into the site of vaccination, and that was the way the infection started. I challenged that with an article in the Graphic, and I showed from standard medical works and reports of the United States Public Health Service that vaccination itself causes tetanus. I challenged it. I also challenged them to make 100 incisions in my skin in various parts of my body and take garden soil from various parts of that garden and rub it into those incisions to prove that the infection from the garden soil caused the tetanus. And I said there is no smallpox in Peekskill. All they have is a case of IV poisoning. That was published in the newspaper. Well, the Commissioner of Health in Peekskill came out with a statement in his local paper. First, he wanted to know, who is this Dr. Shelton? What are these initials after his name? They don't mean anything, and initials after names don't count for anything. It's what's in one's head that counts. And I had the facts. He said, we do have smallpox in Peekskill. And the child did die of tetanus. The death certificate said so. Well, he made out the death certificate. But he didn't accept my challenge. He said, we do have smallpox. They only had the one case. About a week later, the New York Times published a story on the front page. The case of smallpox in Peekskill has turned out to be a case of IV poisoning. I beat him to the scoop by 1 week. He didn't utter a peep. When the Times said it was IV poisoning, he kept his mouth shut. But when I said it was IV poisoning, he wanted to know, who is this guy and what right has he to talk? What kind of an authority is he? Now, this is the way they think for us. They think in a way to sell their wares. I remember we sent a man down to Philadelphia in 1926. In 1925, they had a vaccination epidemic in Philadelphia. Now, I didn't say a smallpox epidemic, I said a vaccination epidemic. They worked it up in this way. In the newspapers, they carried, in the Sunday editions of the newspapers, they carried full-page articles each Sunday telling about the ravages of smallpox in the Middle Ages. Now, those ravages of smallpox in the Middle Ages are not only grossly exaggerated, even the amount of smallpox they had in the Middle Ages is grossly exaggerated. In the first place, there was no differential diagnosis at that time. And everything one had, every type of skin eruption, measles, scarlet fever, and various other types of skin eruptions were diagnosed as smallpox. It was not until the time of Sydenham that smallpox was differentiated from scarlet fever and measles. And that alone cut the incidence of smallpox by more than half, just by differentiating the disease. Well, it cut the death rate of smallpox too. But at any rate, they told these stories. In each article, they emphasized the value of vaccination in preventing smallpox. After they thought they had the public well softened up, well brainwashed, they sent out 30 letters. This was done by the H.K. Mulford Company and one or two other companies that were manufacturing vaccines. They sent out 30 letters to 30 selected physicians, and they said, be on the lookout for a case of smallpox. Well, one of them picked up a Negro down in the Negro section that was said to have syphilis, but he diagnosed the case as smallpox. And with this one case, they started an epidemic. And they began vaccinating everybody. Well, in Philadelphia, they used to go in there and rope off an area and put guards all around, and then they'd go from house to house, apartment to apartment, room to room, and they'd look under the beds and they'd look in the closet, so nobody got away. They wouldn't let anybody out until they had the whole section vaccinated. And the epidemic kept growing. Every day more new cases were reported, and more new cases were reported. It was becoming a serious affair. But they were getting ready for the sesquicentennial the following year, and wealthy men, local men, were putting a lot of money into this thing, and they expected to get their money back plus a lot of profit. So they met one evening with the Board of Health in Philadelphia and said, now look here, this thing has got to stop. We're going to lose money. This epidemic must come to an end. The next morning, the headline said, epidemic wanes. That afternoon, the headline said, no new cases. The following morning, there was a little 4-line item on the back page. The epidemic came to a sudden end Well, we sent a man down from physical culture offices to investigate that thing down there, and he got a hold of a member of the Board of Health, a physician who was on the Board of Health, who resigned in protest against the raw deal that the people in Philadelphia was getting from this drug company. He got to him, got the story, and then went to the records, and this is what he found. For a period of 10 years, prior to that year, Philadelphia had had an average of a little more than 600 cases of chicken pox each year, and about 7 cases of smallpox. This year, they had a little over 300 cases of smallpox and a little less than 300 cases of chicken pox. Now, that's what I mean when I say, and I've said many times, I don't care who makes the statistics, if only you let me make the diagnoses. All they did was diagnose a lot of cases of chicken pox and smallpox and create an epidemic of smallpox. And that year, the drug companies that manufactured vaccines paid 25% dividend. They were thinking for the public, they were frightening them, and raking in the coin as a consequence. This is the reason that it is important that we learn to think for ourselves. This is one of the reasons. It is the reason that we must stop being exploited by every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes along. Take the salt vaccine. We were having epidemics of polio every summer prior to the introduction of the salt vaccine. We've been having them every summer since, only we haven't had as many cases. Why? Because before the salt vaccine, they diagnosed influenza, they diagnosed pneumonia, they diagnosed various other diseases, even mild feverish troubles were diagnosed as polio. Then when they started using the polio vaccine, they announced that they had been including in their polio statistics a lot of cases that were not genuine polio, and they were now cutting them out. So by that means alone, they cut the polio rate to less than half, just by changing their diagnosis. That made you think. That made the people think. That read the story that the salt vaccine had actually reduced the amount of polio in the country. Well, all right, what happened last year in Tennessee? They inoculated all the children of Tennessee last year with the salt vaccine. They immunized the whole bunch, with the result that they had twice as many cases of polio last year as they had the year before when they weren't immunized. Now they're urging you to take not the salt vaccine, but the Sabin vaccine. Now they're saying even if you've had 4 shots of the salt vaccine, even if you're already immunized, take the Sabin vaccine anyhow, because we want to sell more Sabin vaccine. They're thinking for you, and they're keeping you in a state of fright. They're telling you, they're lying to you, they're fooling you with tricks of one kind or another, and they're raking in the coin. That is, again, a reason that I say, let us think for ourselves. Now, I see that it's about time for me to bring this thing to a close, because the chairman is over there chomping at the bit to get up here, and let me give you one little word of advice, besides what I've already said, before I quit. And we'll have our questions a little later. We need, in this country today, a strong, well-knit, well-organized, and powerful instrument with which to carry the truth about health, disease, and healing to the people. Not merely to you, but to your neighbors, to your friends, to your families, and even to your enemies. We need it to get it into the hands, into the minds of everybody. And only by organized effort can it be done. Mr. Cheatham alone can't do it, and I alone can't do it. We need to get together and do this as a group. And I would urge each of you, if I've said anything at all here this evening that's worthwhile, if I've said anything at all that you can take home and use, if I have given you any truth at all, then I would urge each of you to get behind that truth and help us to promote it. And I would say, give Mr. Cheatham your support and your cooperation. Let's build in this country a mighty force that will not only give the people the truth about health, disease, and healing, but that will stop the merciless exploitation of the sufferings and the miseries of our people.
Thank you, Dr. Shelton. Well, those that were here this afternoon, I'm sure, found this message most interesting as well, and those that have heard Dr. Shelton for the first time, I'm sure will remember this message for quite some time. I know the first lecture on natural hygiene that I heard was in Chicago, well, it was in Detroit, a number of years ago, and of course I had gone through this evolutionary period, and at that time, I know I went home and I had a number of these, all of these tablets and all that. When I got home that night, I threw away about $300 worth of various things that I had accumulated with the thought of helping myself. I remember one bottle of tablets that I'd gotten especially for my wife, amino acids and so on. $28 I paid for it. I didn't just throw them out. I just took them all the way out into the alley and dumped them in the garbage can because I felt that strongly that here was at last the truth. I no longer had to depend upon someone else to help me. But all I had to do is to find the truth for myself, and that's the thing that is so wonderful about natural hygiene, is that it provides the answer for you. Now, Dr. Shelton will answer any question that you have. If you do not have paper, if you'll raise your hand, the young lady will be glad to provide you with paper to write out your questions on. The question, as royal jelly is a most natural food, if it is proven to help humans, would you recommend it? It is now proved good for burns and sores.
Royal jelly is the finest food in the world for the developing queen bee. If any of you want to be queen bees, I recommend it very highly. But the idea that it is a cure or a salve for sores and burns is just the old drug idea brought over into the realm of nutrition, and it's a false idea.
I have been a hygienist for 4 years, and I still vomit every time I fast, which is about every 2 or 3 months, and I still feel terrible even on a short fast as long as I can stand it.
You really need a longer fast than you have taken, and you need to go through that period of vomiting. It lasts sometimes only 1 day, sometimes 2 days, sometimes 3 days, sometimes a week, even in some cases as much as 2 weeks. It's very annoying, it's very distressing. At the beginning you think you're going to die, you're afraid you are, and after a few days you're afraid you're not going to die, but you don't. It's a good cleaning out process. It's a process of elimination. The liver is working overtime and throwing out an enormous amount of waste matter, and it's beneficial to go through it.
Please explain if dairy products and eggs are necessary for good nourishment.
No, they're not necessary. After a child is weaned at the normal weaning period, there is no longer any need at all that it ever take milk. Now, this doesn't mean that you cannot take milk if you want to. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have food value. It means that it's not necessary. It can be dispensed with. Other food can take its place. Milk is provided for the young animal during a certain period of its development, after which it is weaned, and thereafter never has milk again. Now, the dairy industry, with the help of the medical profession, has taught us that we are never to be weaned, that we are to remain sucklings all our lives. Even if we live to be 90 or 100, we must still be nurslings. Now, naturally, they don't want our mothers to nurse us that long. The cow and the goat must do the work, so they can sell the milk. The ads on the milk truck say you never outgrow your need for milk.
What value have cooked foods?
Cooking, all kinds of cooking, and even the most conservative type of cooking, reduces the food value of all types of food. It does not destroy all of their food value. Otherwise, people who lived on practically all cooked food wouldn't last very long. They do have some food value left in them, but you do destroy much of the food value in cooking. So that the ideal diet is the uncooked food diet.
Well, we'll ask this one anyway. What are you going to do with natural hygiene when the A-bombs drop and the coasts are sprayed with chlorine gas?
Well, we're all going the same way you are. When the A-bombs drop, if we're foolish enough to let them drop them, it's up to the human race to stop the follies of the people who call themselves leaders in this world, the diplomats and the presidents and the kings. I think we ought to get rid of them. We've been supporting them long enough. The most expensive luxury that the human race maintains is the state. We don't anymore need the state with all of its all of its means of coercion and tyranny than the animals of the field and forest need it. We can get along just as well as they do without being beaten around by the policemen in these clubs, without being thrown into jail, without being hung and electrocuted and gassed. We don't need them any more than they do. They established the state about 10,000 years ago as a means of keeping slaves in subjection. When the slave system collapsed and the feudal system followed, the feudal state came into existence to keep the feudal serfs in subjection. When feudalism collapsed and capitalism came into existence, the capitalist state was organized to keep the wage slaves in subjection. In Russia, where they have state capitalism, the capitalist state over there is to keep the slaves to the state in subjection. But everywhere, exploitation is the reason for the state. We can get along without it. If we stop the system of exploitation, we won't have any longer any reason to keep people in subjection.
How would a person manage a case of stomach ulcers to be cured?
Not to be cured, but to heal. I take stomach ulcer cases and put them to bed and stop them from eating. And I just let them lie there and get well. They do, in a reasonable time, 3 to 4 weeks. The ulcer is healed. Then teach them to properly eat and properly care for themselves, and they don't have any recurrence of ulcer.
Why do they advocate giving protein to athletes when they are performing? They say to avoid heart attacks for the excess energy expended.
Well, it doesn't matter what they say. I don't know who they are. They say a lot of things that the whole experience of mankind through all past ages has shown to be false. Athletes didn't take protein before they performed in the past, and they didn't die of heart attack. Isn't it ridiculous? It's like giving us salt tablets in hot weather. Now, I didn't eat salt tablets when I grew up as a young fellow working in the fields in Texas. And it gets hot. And my father and my grandfather didn't take them. And I went down into the tropics, and I didn't find the people in the tropics taking salt tablets, but it's necessary. Who said it was necessary? I have a friend who lives in Nicaragua. He came up here about 2 years ago. He said, Dr. Sheldon, what is this story that we have to have salt tablets? And I explained to him the theory behind it and why. I said, are they doing it in your country now? He says, they've just commenced to introduce it. After all these thousands of years that people have lived in the tropics, they just now found that they need salt tablets. And they just now found that athletes need a lot of protein just before they perform to keep them from dying of heart trouble. Can you imagine? Jack Dempsey, who is still living, he never died of heart trouble. He's still living. He didn't eat a heavy meal of protein before he went into the ring. As a matter of fact, the athletes refrained from eating before going into the ring. They refrained from eating before going out on the track to run. Can you imagine Murray Rose, the fastest man in the water in the world today, who was brought up as a vegetarian from infancy and who is still a vegetarian and who's beaten everything that the world can throw at him, both at the Olympics and since? Can you imagine Murray Rose having a big meal of protein before he goes in for a swim? He doesn't. I know him.
For a teaser, I assume she means for babies, is there a place for graham crackers, Fig Newtons, and hard cookies?
Babies don't need teethers. A child should not be given graham crackers, Fig Newtons, and things of that kind between meals because it's cutting its teeth. If a child is properly cared for, if it is properly fed, it will cut its teeth without the slightest pain, without the slightest upset of the stomach, without the slightest inconvenience. You won't even know they're cutting them until they've come through.
Is it possible to maintain good health on only fresh fruit and vegetables?
Well, that depends on your definition of fruit. If you accept the biologist's definition of fruit, which is a rather broad one, the answer is yes. But if you confine the term fruit to what's commonly thought of as fruit, such as apples and oranges and plums and grapes and peaches, the answer is no, you can't do it. You must have nuts or some other source of protein in addition to them. But biologically, the nut is a fruit.
What do you think of a banana diet? Also, same, bananas, I presume, for paracelsus of the bowel. What do you mean by soup milk? Explain a little more fully how much to drink and when.
I think by soup milk, whoever asked that question got the wrong impression. I didn't say soup milk. Soup, milk, vegetable juices, fruit juices. I named each item separately. There should be a comma between soup and milk. You know what milk is and you know what soup is, but soup milk, I never heard of it either. I don't blame you for wondering. Banana diet. A number of years ago, I'd say 40 years ago, the banana diet was tried out by a number of athletes as their training diet. Some athletes tried bananas and others ate eggs. And it may surprise you, those of you who believe you have to have a lot of protein. Bananas are a low-protein diet, eggs are a high-protein diet. The athletes who had the banana diet had greater endurance and greater strength than the men who had the egg diet. But now that wasn't the bananas that we're getting today. We haven't had a decent banana in the United States since the opening of World War II. The bananas we get today are pulled so green and they're brought in here. They're so green you can't tell what they are. They look like leaves. They put them in vaults and gas them to make them yellow. They handle them in such a way that they bruise them and they don't ripen. They rot in the center. Every place they're bruised, they rot, and you don't get a decent banana. It's not ripe. It's not sweet. No athlete would be foolish enough to try to train on a banana diet of that kind.
What is arthritis? And I believe she means, is it relieved by medicines of acids, hydrochloric, and bicarbonates, and so forth?
Arthritis means, literally, it means inflammation of a joint. Now, you can have arthritis as a consequence of inflammation of the joint. You can have arthritis as a consequence of injury to the joint, physical injury, trauma. This would be called arthritis. But what people usually think of as arthritis is so-called rheumatoid arthritis, in which they have enlargement of the joint, inflammation of the joint, distortion of the joint, and so on, and it's more or less progressive. It spreads from one joint to the other, whereas an injury to the knee would injure that one knee and you wouldn't have any trouble in the other. In rheumatoid arthritis, it may develop in one knee and spread to the other knee or to the hip or to the spine or to the spinal part of the neck or to the wrist or some other place in the body. This kind of arthritis, you can relieve pain with various drugs for a short time. The relief is a fiction. You've merely sandbagged your nerves into insensibility. This kind of relief actually makes you worse, but we are a people who have been taught to believe that we want relief, and we are so determined to have relief that we'll die to get it if we have to. So sometimes we kill ourselves in search for relief. The way to get rid of arthritis is to remove its causes. Now, these causes exist in your way of life. They exist in your eating habits, in your smoking habits, in your drinking habits, in your sexual habits, in your emotional habits, and so on. These causes must be removed. They must be corrected. The toxins that have accumulated in your bloodstream must be removed, and this is best done by rest, mental, physical, and physiological. There was a lady here this afternoon who was at my place several years ago. She lived in California at that time. She lives in St. Petersburg now. Her husband was with her at that time. He had arthritis. They both had a fast. The husband was later killed 2 years ago. He was killed in an automobile accident. She and her 2 children are living now with her mother in St. Petersburg. He said, "Do you remember how rapidly my husband recovered from his arthritis?" I said, "Yes, he did. He was there only 5 weeks. And in less than 5 weeks, he was free of his arthritis, which he had had for several years, but which hadn't become a very extensive or a very severe case even at that time. Arthritis can be very severe in a short time, and very much deformity can take place, or it can take years for the same amount of deformity to occur, depending on the patient and his mode of living. This case made a very rapid recovery. Others require a much longer period of time depending on their condition.
That's all the questions, Doctor. And I want to thank you very much for making the trip down to Tampa, and it was certainly a pleasure to have you here.
And I want to say, in saying goodbye, that I'm happy to have had this opportunity to address you, and I hope you will join with Mr. Cheatham after I leave and help us to carry the truth about health, disease, and healing to the people of these United States. In this locality in particular, it will be your work, and to the world as a whole. Hygiene originally belonged to mankind, and it still does. They should be brought back to a realization that man's original way of life, which conformed to the laws of life, is the proper way for him to live now as it was in the past. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
For many years, Dr. Shelton published a monthly magazine called The Hygienic Review. Copies from the last year of issue are still available. Reading from some of the titles here, I see Why You Have Arthritis, The Basis of Normal Function, Nature's High Road to Health, Alternative Schooling for Children, A Way of Life, Your Marvelous Heart, Stomach Ulcer, The Unity of Disease, Natural Law and Natural Hygiene, How to Make Yourself Over by Self-Programming. If you're interested in any of these, you can obtain a list of what's available and the price by sending a self-addressed stamped envelope to Willow Publishing, W-I-L-L-O-W, that's Dr. Shelton's daughter, P.O. Box 6636 A.H., San Antonio, Texas, 78209. Another excellent book is The Life and Times of Herbert M. Shelton, written by Gene Oswald. Besides explaining how Dr. Shelton came on to hygiene and why he devoted his life to it, it covers the basic principles of natural hygiene and the laws involved and so forth. It's an excellent introductory book. It's available from Franklin, F-R-A-N-K-L-A-N Books, 11815 West Somerset Drive, S-O-M-E-R-S-E-T, Franklin, Wisconsin, 53132. Now, another excellent source of books and other materials is from Get Well, Stay Well America. You can write for their catalog. 4390 Bidwell, B-I-D-W-E-L-L Drive, Fremont, F-R-E-E-M-O-N-T, California, 94538. I have heard many people who have embraced hygiene say that their rapid return to health was a miracle. Now, the dictionary gives the definition of a miracle as an event or action that apparently contradicts known scientific laws and is hence thought to be due to supernatural causes, especially to an act of God. A remarkable event or thing, marvel. Now, I recently came across what I think is a good definition of a miracle. It was published in 1881, and I think the author's name was Johannes Levi. Now think about this definition. He said, miracles are events which surprise those who are ignorant of their causes. If you have any comments on these tapes by Dr. Shelton, why, feel free to write or send a cassette. My address is P.O. Box 110, Pullman, P-U-L-L-M-A-N, West Virginia, 26421. This is Everett Wybert, and the remainder of this side of the cassette is blank.